My name is Beatrice Hill. I'm 48 years old, recently divorced, and living in a small but cozy home I built for myself after decades of putting others first. For years, my parents dismissed me as the awkward one in the family, the one who never quite measured up to my siblings' polished success. But I learned to trust my own judgment, and today, I finally acted on it. I stood in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, listening to my mother's voice float through with that particular tone of false concern. "Beatrice, honey, maybe it's better if you don't come to the reunion. You don't really fit in anymore, you know? After the divorce and everything." My father's voice joined in from the extension. "It's just a phase you're going through. Why make it awkward for everyone?" I swallowed hard, pride burning in my throat. "Okay," I said quietly. The moment I hung up, something inside me broke clean in half, and then it sharpened into something I'd never felt before. I stood in my kitchen long after the call ended, staring at the yellow wallpaper I'd chosen myself, the small table where I ate breakfast alone most mornings. My hands trembled as I replayed every word. This wasn't concern for my well-being. This was embarrassment. They weren't worried about me feeling uncomfortable. They were worried about themselves. About explaining my smaller life, my failed marriage, my ordinary job to relatives who'd always heard about my brother's law practice and my sister's medical career. I realized with stunning clarity that they hadn't just uninvited me. They'd erased me. Like I was a mistake in the family portrait that could be cropped out for a cleaner image. The hurt settled deep in my chest, heavy and cold. But underneath it, something else stirred. A quiet anger that felt less like fire and more like steel. This wasn't sudden, I realized. This erasure had been happening my whole life. I'd just been too busy trying to earn their approval to notice. The call came 2 days later from my cousin Nora, the only family member who'd ever treated me like an actual person rather than an afterthought. "Hey, I'm so excited for Saturday. What time are you getting there?" Her cheerful voice made my stomach clench. "I'm not going," I said carefully. "Mom and Dad thought it would be better if I stayed home." The silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably long. Then Nora's voice came back, quieter and confused. "That's strange. They've been planning this whole speech about family sacrifices and sticking together through hard times. I just assumed you'd be there since." She trailed off. "Since what?" I pressed. Nora hesitated. "Since you're listed in the program as one of the family contributors. They even have a whole section dedicated to people who've helped the family through rough patches." My breath caught. Sacrifices. Contributors. Words that described things I'd done, money I'd given, years I'd spent propping up my parents when their business failed, when medical bills piled up, when they needed someone reliable. Sacrifices they apparently wanted credit for without my presence complicating the narrative. That evening, I pulled out old boxes from my closet, the ones I'd shoved away after my divorce because sorting through the past felt too painful. But now I needed to remember. I needed proof that I wasn't imagining things. The paperwork was all there, preserved in my methodical way. Bank statements showing transfers to my parents' account, thousands of dollars over 5 years. Copies of checks I'd written to cover their mortgage when Dad's business went under. Letters in my mother's handwriting, flowery thank you notes saying things like, "You saved us, B," and "We don't know what we would have done without you." Emails from my father asking for just one more loan, promising to pay me back when things turned around. They never did pay me back. And I never asked them to, because that's what family did, right? They helped each other. I laid the documents across my dining room table, a timeline of my own erasure. The pattern was clear. My exclusion had started right after I stopped being useful. Right after my divorce left me with less money to spare, right after I finally said I couldn't cover their property taxes that year. The moment I stopped rescuing them, I stopped mattering. The printed reunion program arrived in my mailbox on Thursday, 3 days before the event. Someone had clearly sent it to me by accident, probably thinking I'd be there. I opened it carefully, hands shaking slightly as I unfolded the glossy trifold brochure. There was my family's story, laid out in neat paragraphs and carefully chosen photos. My brother standing with my parents in front of their house. My sister and her kids at some holiday gathering. And there, on the second page under a heading that read, "Family Contributors Who Made Our Journey Possible," was my name. Beatrice Hill. listed alongside two uncles and a family friend who'd invested in my father's failed business venture. My contribution wasn't specified, but I knew what it referenced. The years of financial support, the countless times I'd dropped everything to help them move or renovate or deal with some crisis. They wanted my legacy, my sacrifices, my contribution to their story. They just didn't want my actual presence there to complicate things. To remind people that their success story had required my money, my time, my quiet disappearance from my own life's priorities. I called my Uncle Bernard the next morning. He was my father's older brother, a man who'd always been the family's quiet truth-teller, the one who said uncomfortable things at gatherings and didn't care who got offended. We met for coffee at a diner halfway between our houses. He ordered black coffee and looked at me with those sharp eyes that miss nothing. "They told you not to come," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, wrapping my hands around my own cup for warmth. "They said I didn't fit in anymore." Bernard snorted. "That's rich. You fit in fine. You just stopped fitting their narrative." He leaned forward. "Let me tell you what's really happening, B. Your parents are planning this big speech about how they overcame hardship through family values and determination. They're going to talk about sacrifices they made, lessons they learned." He paused. "If you're sitting there in that room, people might actually remember who made the real sacrifices, who wrote the checks, who gave up their own stability to keep theirs intact." His words confirmed what I'd already suspected. My absence wasn't about protecting me from awkwardness. It was about protecting their story from the truth. I sat in my car after meeting Bernard, watching rain streak down the windshield. I had a choice to make. I could show up anyway, force my way into that reunion, make them acknowledge me. I could confront them publicly, expose their lies in front of everyone. The old Beatrice would have done that, desperate for any scrap of recognition. But I wasn't that person anymore. The divorce had taught me something valuable. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away. Stop fighting for people who don't value you. Stop shrinking yourself to fit into spaces that were never meant to include you. So I decided to do exactly what my parents asked. I would stay home. I wouldn't show up. I wouldn't make a scene. But I also wouldn't disappear quietly. I spent that evening drafting a letter, choosing each word carefully. No anger, no accusations. Just facts. Just truth. I attached copies of old agreements, letters they'd written me, thank you notes expressing gratitude for money I'd given them. Nothing threatening. Just documentation. I printed everything, slipped it into an envelope, and mailed it to my parents' house. Time to arrive Saturday morning. Reunion day. Saturday morning, I woke early despite having nowhere to go. The reunion started at noon, 2 hours away at my parents' home. I imagined my mother checking the mail, finding my envelope. I imagined her opening it at the kitchen table, my father reading over her shoulder. I pictured their faces when they saw what I'd sent. Not threats, not demands, just a simple note that read, "Thank you for respecting my decision to stay home. I've always tried to support this family in whatever ways I could. I hope the reunion celebrates all the real contributions everyone has made. Wishing you a wonderful day. Beatrice." Below that, the attached documents spoke for themselves. Copies of every check, every transfer, every loan that had never been repaid. Copies of their own letters thanking me, praising me, promising to remember my help. I didn't need to say anything else. The evidence told the story they'd tried to rewrite. I made myself breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, and ate it slowly at my small kitchen table. For the first time in years, I felt completely calm. Free, almost. I'd done exactly what they asked. I'd stayed away. But the truth was already there, sitting in their hands, impossible to ignore. While they celebrated miles away, I spent the day doing ordinary things. I repainted my bedroom closet, a project I'd been putting off for months. I organized my bookshelves. I took a long walk through the park near my house. But part of my mind stayed focused on that reunion, imagining the moment my letter got opened. I knew my mother. She'd open mail first thing, probably before guests arrived. She'd want everything perfect, under control. The envelope would look innocent enough. Her name and my father's, my return address in the corner. She'd probably smile, assuming it was a card wishing them well. I imagined her expression changing as she read my note. The way her eyes would scan down to the attached documents. The cold wash of understanding when she realized what I'd done. Not destroyed them. Not exposed them publicly. Just quietly, calmly, placed truth in their hands right before they stood up to tell their carefully edited story. My phone sat silent on the kitchen counter all morning. I wondered how long it would take before one of them called. The call came at 2:15 in the afternoon. My mother's name flashed on my screen. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Beatrice. Her voice was tight, shaking with controlled fury. What exactly do you think you're doing? I sat down on my couch, pulling a blanket over my lap. I'm at home, Mom. Like you wanted. Don't play games with me. That letter. Those documents. What are you trying to accomplish? I kept my voice steady, calm. Nothing. I just wanted you to have copies of everything before the reunion. I thought it might be helpful for your speech about family contributions. She made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a snarl. You're trying to embarrass us. To ruin this day. How would the truth embarrass you? I asked simply. Long silence. Then my father's voice in the background, demanding to know what I'd sent. My mother's muffled explanation. More silence. When she came back on the line, her voice had changed. Less anger, more fear. People are asking questions, Beatrice. They noticed your name in the program. They want to know where you are. I smiled despite myself. I'm sure you can explain it. You need to fix this, she hissed. But the damage, whatever damage there was, had already spread beyond her control. Over the next few hours, my phone lit up with texts from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. My Aunt Teresa, why aren't you here? Your parents seem upset. My cousin Kevin, did something happen? Mom says there's some confusion about contributions. Even my brothers sent a rare message. What's going on with Mom and Dad? I responded to each one with simple honesty. No long explanations. No emotional outbursts. Just calm, brief truth. They thought it would be better if I didn't attend. I've always tried to help the family when I could. I'm respecting their wishes and staying home. Each response was designed to do one thing. Make people ask more questions. And apparently, they were. Because as the afternoon wore on, the texts shifted. People started remembering things. My cousin Nora called. I just talked to Uncle Bernard. He reminded me about when you helped your parents with their mortgage. And about the business loan. Why didn't you ever mention that? It didn't seem important, I said. It was just what family does. But they're taking credit for... She stopped herself. Never mind. I get it now. One by one, relatives started connecting they'd never bothered to connect before. Memories resurfaced of times I'd quietly stepped in, solved problems, sacrificed my own needs. Stories my parents had carefully buried under their own narrative of self-made resilience. When people asked me directly what had happened, why I wasn't at the reunion, I didn't launch into angry explanations or bitter accusations. I just told them the truth. Calmly. Briefly. Without embellishment. My parents felt I didn't fit in right now. I respected their decision. I sent them some old documents I thought they might want for their records. I've always tried to support the family in whatever ways I could. The power of that restraint surprised me. The more simply I spoke, the more weight my words carried. Anger would have been dismissed as bitter divorced daughter acting out. Tears would have been seen as manipulation. But this calm recitation of facts? People didn't know what to do with it. They couldn't argue with my tone or dismiss my emotions because I wasn't giving them anything to grab on to accept truth. By evening, my mother had called 3 more times. I didn't answer. She left voicemails that shifted from fury to confusion to something that sounded almost like panic. Beatrice, we need to talk about this rationally. You're making people think things that aren't true. Please call me back. This is getting out of hand. But I had nothing more to say. The silence I was maintaining said everything necessary. Sunday morning, I woke to a text from Uncle Bernard. Well done. They spent the whole evening in damage control. People are finally remembering what actually happened. Over the next few days, more details filtered back to me through various relatives. How my parents' planned speech about family sacrifice had fallen flat when people started asking pointed questions about who'd actually made financial contributions. How my Aunt Teresa had publicly mentioned remembering me writing a large check during the mortgage crisis. How my brother had looked uncomfortable when someone asked why I wasn't there to be thanked for my contributions listed in the program. The family was starting to remember. Not because I'd stood in front of them demanding recognition, but because my absence created a hole that made the truth visible. Like a missing puzzle piece that suddenly makes you realize the picture was never complete. My sister called me Tuesday evening. We hadn't spoken in months. Her voice was careful, tentative. I didn't know. About the loans, about how much you'd done for them. I should have paid more attention. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. They're pretty shaken, she continued. People are asking questions they can't really answer. That's not my problem to solve, I said gently but firmly. And it wasn't. By the end of the week, my parents' carefully constructed image was crumbling. The reunion had been meant to celebrate their resilience, their wisdom, their role as family pillars. Instead, it had become the moment when everyone finally noticed the edited-out daughter who'd actually kept them afloat. I heard through Nora that the atmosphere at the reunion had shifted dramatically after people started talking. The respect my parents had worked so hard to cultivate suddenly felt conditional, questioned. People saw them differently now. Not as self-made survivors, but as people who'd accepted help and then erased the helper from the story. The authority they'd wielded in family decisions, their position as the wise elders everyone deferred to, all of it started to slip. Because authority built on a false narrative can't survive exposure to truth. I didn't feel triumphant exactly. More like vindicated. Proven right in a way I'd never expected to be. I'd spent my whole life trying to earn their approval, trying to be good enough to deserve a place at their table. Now I realized I'd had value all along. They'd just convinced me I didn't. Thursday evening, a week after the reunion, I heard a car pull into my driveway. I looked out the window and saw my parents' familiar sedan. My stomach clenched. I hadn't invited them. Hadn't spoken to them since my mother's panicked calls the day of the reunion. They got out of the car and walked to my door, my mother's face tight with anger, my father's expression unreadable. I considered not answering, but curiosity won. I opened the door but didn't invite them in immediately. Beatrice, my mother said, her voice clipped. We need to talk about what you did. What I did. I kept my tone neutral. I stayed home. Like you asked. My father shifted his weight. You know what you did. That letter. Those documents. You embarrassed us in front of the entire family. How did the truth embarrass you? I asked. The same question I'd asked on the phone. It hung in the air between us. My mother's jaw tightened. You've made people think we don't appreciate you. That we took advantage of you. Didn't you? The question came out quieter than I intended. My mother's face flushed red. How dare you? Come inside, I said, cutting her off. For the first time in years, I invited them into my home. My space. On my terms. We sat in my small living room, my parents on the couch, me in the armchair across from them. The room felt smaller with their presence, their disapproval hanging heavy in the air. My mother started first, voice shaking with controlled emotion. You had no right to humiliate us like that. We gave you everything growing up. Raised you, supported you. I know, I interrupted calmly. And I've never said you didn't. I'm not claiming you were bad parents. That seemed to catch her off guard. Then what exactly are you claiming? Nothing, I said. I'm not claiming anything. I'm just not lying anymore. My father leaned forward. Lying about what? About who I am. About what I did. About my value to this family. I kept my voice steady, factual. You asked me not to come because I didn't fit your image of success. Because my divorce and my ordinary life were embarrassing compared to how you wanted the family to look. That's your right. But it's also my right to stop pretending that's okay. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't cry. Didn't plead. Just stated facts. And somehow, that calm scared them more than anger ever could have. I could see it in their faces. They'd expected me to break down, to apologize, to beg for their approval like I always had. My steadiness confused them. My mother tried a different approach. Beatrice, you're our daughter. Of course we want you included. You literally told me not to come because I didn't fit in. She flinched. We were trying to spare you discomfort. The questions about your divorce, about your situation. You were trying to spare yourselves embarrassment, I corrected. There's a difference. For the first time in my life, I wasn't asking them to understand me. Wasn't begging for validation or approval. I was simply stating my boundary and letting it stand. I'm done making myself smaller so you can feel bigger, I continued. I'm done pretending my contributions didn't matter. I'm done accepting crumbs of recognition while you build monuments to yourselves with bricks I helped pay for. My father started to interrupt. I held up my hand. I'm not asking you to change. I'm not demanding apologies. I'm just telling you I won't participate in my own erasure anymore. That's not negotiable. The room fell silent. They stared at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. Maybe I'd finally become someone they couldn't manipulate or dismiss. Someone who'd stopped chasing their approval. They realized, I think in that moment, that I'd changed. Fundamentally. And they no longer had the power they'd always assumed they had over me. 2 weeks later, I received a phone call from my cousin Nora. There's going to be a follow-up family meeting, she said. A kind of check-in after the reunion. Your parents said they want to address some misunderstandings. She paused. They asked specifically if you'd be willing to attend. I sat with that information for a long moment. Part of me wanted to refuse, to maintain my distance. But another part recognized an opportunity. Not to reconcile exactly, but to establish something new. Something honest. I'll come, I said finally. But on my terms. What terms? I speak without interruption. I bring documentation if I choose. And I don't apologize for telling the truth. Nora was quiet. Then she laughed. I'll let them know. This should be interesting. The meeting was scheduled for the following Saturday. This time I'd be there. Not because they'd granted me permission. Not because I was desperately seeking their approval. But because I'd earned my place at that table years ago. And I was done pretending I hadn't. The meeting was held at my Aunt Teresa's house, neutral territory. I arrived exactly on time, carrying a simple folder with copies of the same documents I'd sent my parents. When I walked into the living room, conversation stopped. My parents sat together on one side. Various aunts, uncles, and cousins filled the other seats. All eyes turned to me. I dressed simply but carefully, not trying to impress, just presenting myself with quiet dignity. I sat in an empty chair and met my mother's eyes steadily. My Aunt Teresa cleared her throat. Beatrice, thank you for coming. We wanted to talk about what happened at the reunion, clear up some confusion. There's no confusion, I said calmly. But I'm happy to clarify anything that needs clarifying. For the next 20 minutes, I laid out the timeline. The loans. The mortgage payments. The years of financial support. I showed receipts, bank statements, thank you letters written in my parents' own handwriting. I didn't editorialize. Didn't make accusations. Just presented facts. When my father tried to interrupt, Uncle Bernard spoke up. Let her finish. No one else interrupted me. The room stayed silent except for my voice, steady and clear. When I finished, my mother tried to salvage the situation. We never said Beatrice didn't help us. We've always been grateful. Then why wasn't I invited to the reunion? I asked simply. Why tell me I didn't fit in? She stammered. My father jumped in. We thought it would be easier for everyone. For you, I corrected. Easier for you. My Aunt Teresa spoke up unexpectedly. I remember now. I remember Bea helping during the mortgage crisis. I remember her being there constantly during your business troubles. How did we all forget that? Because they wanted you to, Uncle Bernard said bluntly. Because the story worked better if she wasn't in it. Other voices joined in. Cousins remembering times I'd helped with family events, covered costs, stepped in during crises. Aunts recalling my quiet presence at difficult times. The collective memory of the family was reassembling itself, filling in the blanks my parents had tried to create. My parents sat silent, faces pale. They lost control of the narrative. Lost the room's deference and respect. Years of carefully constructed authority were crumbling because people were finally seeing the truth. And there was nothing they could do to stop it. After the meeting ended and people started leaving, my parents approached me near the door. My father spoke first, voice low. Beatrice, we need your help. I waited. People are questioning everything now. Our judgment, our decisions. They're treating us differently. My mother added, "You could smooth this over. Tell them there were misunderstandings. That we're still a united family." The request hung between us. They wanted me to save them. To rescue their reputation the way I'd rescued their finances years ago. To make myself small again so they could be big. I looked at both of them for a long moment. "No," I said simply. My mother's eyes widened. "What?" "I'm not going to lie for you. I'm not going to pretend this didn't happen or minimize what you did." I kept my voice calm. "I won't punish you. I won't badmouth you to the family. But I also won't rescue you from the consequences of your own choices." My father's jaw tightened. "After everything we did for you, you raised me," I interrupted. "That was your job as parents. It doesn't entitle you to erase me when I become inconvenient." I paused. Respect is no longer optional. Either you see my value or you don't. But I won't beg for recognition anymore. I walked out, leaving them standing in my aunt's doorway. The boundary I'd set was permanent. And I felt lighter than I had in years. Over the following weeks, something unexpected happened. My Uncle Bernard asked if I'd be willing to help organize the family's annual charity fundraiser, a role that had always gone to my parents. "We need someone trustworthy," he said. "Someone who actually knows how to manage money and follow through on commitments. Your parents have always done it, but honestly, you'd be better at it." The request stunned me. This was a position of respect in the family, one that came with real responsibility and recognition. My parents heard about it, of course. My mother called, voice tight. "You're really going to do this? Take over our role." "It's not your role," I said. "It's a volunteer position someone asked me to fill. I'm qualified for it." I said yes. "This is about revenge, isn't it? Punishing us." I sighed. "Mom, not everything is about you. I'm doing this because I was asked and because I can do it well. Your feelings about it aren't my responsibility to manage." She hung up without responding. But I didn't feel guilty. For the first time, I was accepting recognition I'd earned without apologizing for it or minimizing my abilities. The power balance in the family was shifting. Quietly. Completely. I accepted the fundraiser role and threw myself into it. Within weeks, I'd reorganized the donation tracking system, established better communication with donors, and increased participation. People noticed. At family gatherings, relatives asked for my input on financial decisions, asked my opinion on family matters. The deference that had always flowed to my parents began redirecting toward me, not because I demanded it, because I'd proven I deserved it. My parents watched this shift with barely concealed resentment. At a holiday dinner, my mother made a pointed comment. "Must be nice, Bea, finally getting the attention you always wanted." I looked at her calmly. "I never wanted attention, Mom. I wanted to be seen. There's a difference." My sister surprised me by speaking up. "She's right. Bea was always there, always helping. We just didn't notice." Other family members murmured agreement. My mother's face flushed red, but she said nothing more. I realized I hadn't taken anything from my parents. I hadn't stolen their position or sabotaged their reputation. I'd simply stopped hiding. Stopped making myself invisible. And in the space my silence had left, truth had grown. The family finally saw what had always been there. My value. My contributions. My worth. Months after the reunion that I never attended, I sat in my small house on a quiet Sunday morning. The fundraiser had been a huge success. My relationship with extended family had deepened into something real and mutual. I'd even started dating someone, a kind man who thought my ordinary life was extraordinary. My parents and I had settled into a distant but civil relationship. They called occasionally, brief conversations that stayed superficial. They didn't apologize. Probably never would. But they also stopped trying to minimize me. Stopped treating me like an embarrassment. Maybe they'd learned something. Maybe they hadn't. Either way, it wasn't my problem anymore. I'd stopped measuring my worth by their approval. Stopped shrinking to fit into their narrow vision of acceptable success. The house around me, small and cozy and entirely mine, felt like proof. I'd built this life, not to impress anyone or prove a point, but to honor myself, to create space where I could breathe. My phone buzzed with a text from Nora. Lunch this week. I smiled and typed back. Absolutely. This was my life now. Not perfect. Not impressive by anyone's grand standards. But real. Honest. Mine. And I wasn't fitting into anyone else's definition anymore. I stood in my kitchen months later, looking out the window at the small garden I'd planted. Tomatoes growing on vines I'd staked myself. Flowers I'd chosen because I liked them, not because they matched some vision of what a garden should be. I thought about the reunion I'd skipped, the invitation that had been revoked because I didn't fit their image. About the years I'd spent trying to earn a place in a family that should have given it freely. And I realized something profound. I didn't lose my family. I lost the lie I'd been shrinking to fit into. The version of myself that apologized for existing, that made herself small so others could feel big, that accepted crumbs while calling them feasts. That version was gone. In her place stood someone who knew her worth, who didn't need validation from people who'd never valued her to begin with, who could walk away from approval and toward truth. My parents had asked me to stay away from that reunion, and I'd listened. I'd done exactly what they wanted. And somehow, that obedience had freed me. Because in staying away, I'd stopped chasing, stopped begging, stopped participating in my own erasure. They'd asked me not to fit in. I'd listened. And that's how I finally won.